Hi, Scott.
So, as I had mentioned to the group during our fall meeting, and then I had some subsequent meetings with Bob, because we really are trying to get something in place for this. I asked Bob to come on, and he's a lot more eloquent than I am, and I was hoping that he could come on and kind of explain the process in what we've already done and where we are today. So I'm going to shut up and let Bob, because he's very on limited time right now.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you all for participating in this meeting. I wish I could stay for the meeting and participate fully because I enjoyed this work, but I'm actually serving as a member of the Holyoke Community College Presidential Search Committee, and we have a candidate coming up at 1:15, so I got to get back, get in and do that work. You know how that goes. So basically, I wanted to make clear when Scott was talking to me about this to help, because I see some names on here, like I see Bill McCarthy, Rena Bucknell, and of course my own Eloisa from Middlesex. That some of you have been involved in this work going way back. I mean, back to when Elena Quiros Levanas and then Carlos Santiago, who was the Senior Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs, the Chief Academic Officer for DHE, brought everybody together. This is still connected to that work. So this is not some new thing. This is still a continuum running from that point where they brought everybody together around disciplines, both 2-year, 4-year comprehensive, UMass folks by discipline, and everybody met, went through the syllabi for courses, determined what the foundational courses that everyone should take in their first 2 years, no matter where, and identified the 70 to 80% of the content that matched in those courses for the 2-year comprehensive in UMass institutions. And that created those courses that create our ComCom, the transfer foundation, that says a student who takes those first 2 years at Cape Cod, those courses taken there should be transferable and acceptable by someone at Bridgewater State or by someone at UMass Dartmouth, because they're the same 2 years, the same content effectively, not 100%, but the majority of the content will be the same. When I came to this job, Jesus, almost 7 years ago, one of the things Elena asked me to do was to create learning outcomes, common learning outcomes for those courses. So for like 15, 16 disciplines, I think, I pulled together a group of faculty members, Scott being one of them, to help create learning outcomes that would be common learning outcomes for those courses, those foundational courses. So again, not academic freedom reigns, faculty determine how they teach the content, but if someone's taken a course in criminal law or policing, the essence of the content in that course should be the same, whether it's at Cape Cod, whether it's at transfers from their 2-year to their 4-year school. The 4-year faculty is not like, oh my God, you don't know this stuff? Oh, I don't have time to go back and teach you that stuff because you were supposed to already learn that in that first intro course. I don't have time to do that now. That was the thing that undermined our ability to easily facilitate transfers. So we did that, including CJ. CJ faculty developed learning outcomes range of disciplines. Now, where are we at now? Basically, I think Scott from the community college folks came back to me to say, given George Floyd and what happened there, policing in America has changed. And we need to relook at these outcomes that we have, because there's an element of DEI that's not embedded in there that needs to be in these outcomes to reflect the way the world has changed since George Floyd. First place, I got to tell you, I can't tell you many times I've told people across the state and the board and the DHE, the fact that you all came to initiate that change and why you initiated that change, because there's one thing to acknowledge this this calamity event that occurred, but for the faculty members to step up and say, we've got to address that. It's not, it can't be just like something that happened over there. That doesn't mean anything to us. Well, no. We're teaching the next generation of police. We need to make sure that next generation of police, that learning, those lessons from that are imbued in our curriculum. So that's basically how we got to this meeting here. So again, I went out and grabbed a UMass CJ professor, Worcester State CJ professor, and Scott for the criminal justice group. They got together, looked at those learning outcomes. I think it's the 5 courses, made adjustments to them, reflecting on really the work that was developed by the community college criminal justice faculty. That's what Scott brought to the 4-year people to say, here's the stuff our folks have talked about. Let's incorporate that into and revise and update these learning outcomes going forward. And so we did, collaboratively, because the other folks representing their segments and they're tweaking and just whatever. I mean, come to a final set of learning outcomes, and it's like, okay, now we've got to go back to folks, because again, you hear my motto, this is by faculty, with faculty, for faculty. So it's not me, the suit at the DHE, because I'm not a CJ, that's not my area of discipline, and it would not be appropriate. My job is to facilitate the process, but it's working with you all to do it. And that's kind of where we are now. The 3 of them have gone back to their respective segments to say, here's what we got, here's the changes that we've recommended, and to get your feedback and reaction to that so that we can bring that back again together to the 3 folks, make final tweaks on it, and implement those new learning outcomes. And as I said before, when we did this, I don't know, 3 years ago, Scott, and I say now, we're saying these are the learning outcomes that your colleagues have recommended. I mean, are you required to do them? I mean, nobody's going to be standing outside your classroom with a gun waiting for you if you don't do it. On the other hand, if they're created by your colleagues, there should be nothing on there that would make any of you fall off your chair and say, oh, no, that's not what we do in this course. I mean, there's people who teach your course who help write those things. But I got to believe anything you read on it, I'll be like, yeah, that's it. Now, there may be 2 or 3 other things like that. 2 other things I think are important in this course. Add them. That's fine. But hopefully we have captured the essence in those 5 courses created by all of you. So that's the mission today. And I think that's what Scott's going to try to do today with all of you, is to go through and probably help you highlight it, what the changes were you made. I think you did. I think you did them in red. I seem to recall. I'll be wrong. Because that'll make it easier for people to see what the changes were, so they can see, are these changes are reasonable? Does that make sense? Is that consort with what I'm doing or what I expect my students to learn in this course? That's really what we're trying to get done. So we're not trying to force anything on people. It's your voice that's writing these. So all I'm doing is just trying to shepherd the process through. And I'm just so proud of you all having said, we need to change the work that we did. It must have been at least 3 years ago. At least, Scott, didn't it? You think?
Well, if we
yeah, it's gotta be. Yeah.
back to
I think it was before COVID that we did the CJ outcome. So, yeah, that would be more than 3 years ago. So, given what happened with George Floyd and what's happened across America around policing, there's no doubt that the learning outcomes needed to be tweaked. No doubt about that. Now, how? That's what you all are going to do. And as I look at this collective wisdom on this screen, there is absolutely a lot of, oh yeah, I know Heidi Getchell, Bastian, I know that name. I'm confident this group of folks working together will be able to arrive at some revisions that make sense for what you're teaching, for your students, for your discipline, that we can get agreement across the other institutions and move this work forward. So that's what I have for you all. And I'm going to hand the baton back to Scott.
So as an update, I did present the updated outcomes. These were outcomes that were established, actually created by an earlier group. And correct me if I'm correct, Rena, you kind of like worked on that earlier group. So, and they were updated. I did present them to the group, and there were a lot of questions regarding, we understood that there was supposed to be a DEI focus, and not all of the courses had an exact DEI focus in each of for the 5 foundational courses. There were some concerns that some institutions didn't like the idea that we were kind of, what they felt was that they were being force-fed the outcomes. And I tried to explain individually through email that the outcomes had actually been established before COVID, and that they should have been funneled down to the CJ departments to be used in those foundational courses. So where we're at right now is that we need to examine and offer input for those outcomes. Bye, Bob. Thank you. That we need to kind of look them over, see where we are with regards to each of the courses and the stated outcomes, and see if we can tweak them, that we can push them off to the 4-year. I know that the 4-year institutions had a similar problem, and UMass was kind of sitting back, because there's really UMass Lowell and UMass Boston are the only 2 schools that offer the criminal justice program. So they basically said that they were going to sit back and wait for the 2 and 4 years to develop these, and then they would just kind of accept them as whole. We have to keep in mind, as Bob had touched upon, as the academic freedom, is that we, as I say to my adjuncts, these are the 5 foundational courses, and these are the outcomes that were established. There's nothing wrong with adding, if you feel that they're not sufficient and you wanted to add an additional whatever, then do it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just coming to an agreement that we all say these are what should be taught at the very bare minimum in these 5 courses. After that, if you want to add more, then feel free to do that. So has everybody had an opportunity to look at those outcomes from our last meeting?
No.
Thanks, Bill. You're like one of my students. Yeah.
I didn't get them.
Who, you didn't get them, Kate? I sent them to Jimmy, and I'll send them to you. Do I have your email? Were you added to the group?
I think so, yeah. I've been getting the emails. Maybe I just missed it.
Okay,
We'll check.
I can send them off again.
Hey, Scott, I'm looking at them. Are these the ones from November of 2022?
Yes,
Can you send them to me, Scott?
yes.
Thank you.
What was the date? And they were from Scott in November of 2022?
November 21st, 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you. I needed that too. I'm looking at it now. I'm looking for them now. All right, got it.
So Scott, I have a question.
Yeah,
So the Eloisa here from Middlesex. Our learning outcomes here, they have become part of our course description, and they go through the curriculum process where it has to be approved, and then it goes into the catalog. So I'm happy to work on all of this, but my question is, so once we come up with the learning outcomes per course, do we have the freedom to maybe edit or adjust the actual outcome? Because I'm sure once we bring it through curriculum, they're going to start wordsmithing things, because that's usually what the process is to get things approved and going into the catalog. So would it be acceptable, like we have the basis, the foundation, the frame of what's created within this group, but then do we have the freedom to make minor adjustments to the outcome to fulfill whatever edits or suggestions we get from them?
I don't want to say yes, because
Yeah.
it's going to be adjusted based upon this group, those outcomes. Everybody should have them now. So I don't want to say yes, because that's a work product that this group puts together.
Yeah.
And if you feel that they need to be adjusted, this is the time as we continue moving down this to make those adjustments, so that you're not forced to make the adjustments again.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to say yes simply because that we will have worked really hard to put something really good together.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if it's not good enough for you, then it might not be good enough.
Oh, and it's not that it's for me, but just talking about from experience going through a curriculum committee for things to get approved, usually things get updated before they're finalized and approved. So yes, I'll try my best to give input here. So I'm at a place where I feel like, okay, this is good. It will be approved by our curriculum committee, but within our institution, it's unique. Like I said, it's part of our course description, the learning
Yeah.
outcome, and it has to be the same across the board. It goes into the catalog for the college. So even after we as a group come up with it together, I'll have to go through a process within my college to get it approved.
Yeah, so just
Yeah.
so everybody's aware, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a problem with program assessment at Middlesex, and
Mhm.
faculty not agreeing on core outcomes for each of the courses. So the academic vice president kind of put the iron fist down and said, okay, you're not going to agree on these. Well, now they're going to have to go through governance, and they're going to be attached to the course description. So everybody's forced to use them. That is very unusual. When I was doing the assessment for Northern Essex, that was a proposal because we were going to follow suit with Middlesex, but it was the last ditch effort to force faculty to accept them. So
Yeah.
you are in a very unique position, because under the contract, under the MCCC contract, we do have academic freedom, and we have to list. The only freedom that we don't have is that we can't change what's in the catalog.
Yeah.
And so by assigning outcomes to the course description, you're actually forced to, following in line with the contract, you're forced to use those outcomes.
Which is why once we do the work here, then I'll have the extra step to do. So I'm just thinking ahead. Like, what if once I get to that point that it has to be approved for the catalog, I get pushed back here. So I'm just trying to think ahead. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out.
So, I mean, this is a drawn out, daunting, tedious task, to say the least. And I think that one way of doing it, my recommendation would be for, even though people that weren't able to make the call, if we can include them, I would like to see people jump on one. Just pick one course, like a group, we'll call it subcommittees, on one course, address it so that it's a smaller group working on it. You can move forward quicker with less opinions, and then bring it back to the entire group. I think that, in my opinion, that would probably be the best way to approach it. Because after you're working on one group, you might turn around and go, okay, I just accept the other ones.
Hey,
Because
Scott.
hang on,
Scott.
Lena had her hand up, Bill, first.
Bill, you want to go?
No, you can go. Go ahead.
Scott, I didn't hear you correctly. If we have the 5, which we have we have the outcomes for the courses, I thought you said that we could just add another one if we wanted to in our syllabi. So why can't we keep what we've had, and then if people want to add whatever has been listed here or adjusted, why can't that happen? Why do we have to go through?
Well, Bob was looking
I
for-
agree. I agree with Rena. That sounds like a lot of work there, Scott. And I don't know what the end agenda is, because I was just looking at this one here, Intro to Criminal Justice course, and at the bottom it says modify implicit bias in the CJ system. But so you're saying that there is implicit bias? I mean, that's kind of a strong statement. I'm like, oh, wait a second. Where are you coming from with that?
Well, this is a work in progress. This was put together by myself, Worcester State and UMass Lowell. And it was more of a framework to pull back and present to everybody else, all the stakeholders, to say, okay, this is what we kind of threw together. Can we kind of talk about this? The idea of, there was a DEI focus on it, and I know that some of you are kind of cringe at the DEI concepts. And I see both sides of the position on this, but the idea is to recognize that that there's women in policing that we need to identify. That should be something that should be discussed. There should be a discussion of the systematic racism within police departments that has led to, from Michael Brown to George Floyd to most recently the last two cases in the last month. There is stuff that's out there that we cannot just ignore. It also puts us into, if you guys, some of you met with me over the summer, I think it was 2 summers ago, we talked about getting ahead of post-bill and getting ahead of Boston dictating that what we needed, and saying that thanks for your input, but we've already got ahead of that because we recognized that there was a problem with it. So
and they're gonna listen. They're gonna listen to us. That just sounds, they very rarely listen to what we have to say. I've been on this committee for 20 years, and whatever they decide, they tell us what to do, and then people just decide that they don't want to be part of the Quinn bill certification anymore. So nothing against what you've already done, Scott, but I'm just saying that this is a very volatile type of thing. Just looking at some of those, I'm like, why are we taking this on? That just seems.
I think it was there was a group that met 2 summers ago. Well, it was fall of 2021, beginning of that summer, and then bled into the fall semester. That was attempting to, for the Mass Pathways, was attempting to make these adjustments outside of Bob's circle. And I called Bob when Bob said, hey, Scott brought this to me. I brought it to him because this is his ballpark, and work was being done outside of his ballpark. So I was giving him a heads up on it. And then he said, okay, so what do they suggest? And I basically told them that they want the group, and it was made up of community college members. It was made up of state universities, and both UMass both UMass Boston and Lowell. And they did come up, they tweaked a few of these. And
Who's they?
That group tweaked that. It was a lot.
DHE group, or
it was DHE led, but not but it was faculty.
Okay, and they're doing that for all courses, like in sociology, they're doing it in engineering.
Yes,
they're doing it for everybody.
Yes, all of the.
So if we worked on this for the next, let's say, 6 months to year, how would we ensure that what we have is what they would approve?
Because this is what Bob heads all of this with the DHE. This is an extension of the 2015-2016 convening and convention.
Mm-hmm.
So this is his area. So he puts it in, and that's the end of it.
So, and that's what I'm saying. I'm like, well, wait, what do the other people have? Because some of these things here, that it's very controversial, and we offer a course in multicultural diversity in criminal justice. It's one of our required classes at Quinsig. And sometimes the discussions in the classrooms get very volatile. And, I've had a couple instructors say that they had to take a break from teaching it because they wanted to, that ideally they had said, they wanted to change the minds of people in the classes. And, and it just got kind of stressful. So they took off a semester or 2 from teaching it just because of that. And I don't know if that's what they're trying to do, where they're trying to have, all these different discussions in every class, in all 5 classes. They're going to have these issues brought up?
Well, I think the idea was, Paul, Bill, was that not every one of us requires a multicultural course within the criminal justice department.
Yeah.
And because Northern Essex doesn't, we have a response to a critical incident response course as part of our required courses. We don't offer this. So the idea is for all programs to have something integrated into it, into the 5 foundational courses, which we all have to have.
Okay.
Scott, just, you know, a couple of my faculty, they looked at this, a couple of things, they said, you know, we already do that. Why are we being somewhat pushed to put this into an outcome? And I noticed one thing, if you could look at crim law, was there anything, I think some of the wording has been changed in that, but the last thing, how women and minority judges make a difference. I would think that this stuff has been occurring in classes anyway. I'm more comfortable with having the outcomes that we have. And then if someone, like we said earlier, if someone wants to add something to their syllabus,
Yeah.
they could. I mean, we're getting it from our DEI committee. We're getting it from a DEI director. We're getting it from this group, that group, and the confusion and what's right, what's wrong, what's indifferent. And I kind of agree with what Bill just said about the one comment about the implicit bias. I'm trying to find it again. Implicit
Under
bias.
intro to criminal justice, it's the last bullet.
Yep. Are we assuming there is? There isn't? I don't know.
Right,
Opening
it says,
a can of
because
worms.
it says, after successful completion of the course, students will be able to modify implicit bias in the CJ system. I mean, do you want to have everybody talking about that guy, George Floyd? I mean, he was a home invader. I mean, he had a whole list of things. He wasn't supervised. I'm sorry, the police officer wasn't supervised. He had a complaint against him every year. He had 17 complaints. So it was a big problem. It wasn't just, race with him. There were all kinds of issues. I mean, if that's what they're going to be talking about. And the same thing too with the LGBTQ, there's all kinds of problems that are going on right now with, with all the different communities where, I mean, that's all in the news. I mean, we're going to be talking about that in the criminal justice. That's one of the things. I see it as a very, controversial topic where, if you have some things going on now, all of a sudden you're going to have a module on that. And yeah, I know people have it in their courses already, but I mean, that you're going to require that's going to be a learning outcome. After successful completion of this course, students will be able to examine the factors that shape contemporary policing, women in policing, support of the LGBTQ, that's a very heavy statement. And I'm just saying, we're going to have we're going to put a lot of that on us, our small committee. It just
Jason.
seems like.
So speaking frankly, I think we all kind of know what's going on here in that the ruling class of education and information has decided that DEI is going to be a primary focus in everything all the time, everywhere. So to be honest with you, Bill and Rena, I'm not too entirely sure that we're going to get out of it. Because I think that's kind of what I hear you saying, if I'm interpreting it right, that you do this in the class anyway, which I would totally agree with. But the bottom line is somebody's going to want to see these one way or the other. So I think it's kind of a jagged pill to swallow that will need to be swallowed. But let me ask you this: I'm assuming, like myself, it's not so much the concepts that you're worried about. And again, I would say that we talk about, you almost have to talk about all of this stuff in class all the time anyway. as opposed to the language. So where you were talking about your modify implicit bias in the criminal justice system, I would say that as a learning outcome, that doesn't make sense anyway. So if that term was something like explore implicit bias or identify implicit bias or one of the other, recognize implicit bias, would that make it more palatable to you to swallow this jagged pill that we're going to have to swallow?
I don't know, it's something I want to think about, but I've had some of the same experiences in my classes that Bill has had. I mean, stopping a class because people are saying, what are you trying to do here? Or what are they? I think we got some other situations to look at. I'm more comfortable with, and Bob mentioned academic freedom. So we have our syllabi. You can always add something to a syllabi. That doesn't necessarily mean, once more, we have to go back to assessment. How do you evaluate? How do you assess that someone actually is getting out of that class and they're able to do that, or they have done that? So I don't know. I guess what I'd like to do is have a little more time to look at these now that I have them, go through them. I don't care, Scott, which class you want me to look at. It doesn't matter.
That was just a suggestion to kind of split up the workload.
Jason, I think you bring up some good points. I want to be able to look at them. I'm not sure. I don't know. Hearing from some of my faculty, they were like, what? This was working. This was fine. We do this now. A lot of people either, they're getting different OER books or they're using different things. I think it's there. We're just getting so many just different messages. I don't know.
Yeah, and two, hey Scott, introduction to corrections, assess LGBTQI treatment in prisons and potential correctional administrative concerns. Okay. In what way? From a punishment standpoint or from a civil rights standpoint? I mean, this is there's a lot of data on these things, and who's to say which one is the one that we should go with? You know what I'm saying? We can see examples of it, and
that kind of goes to the wordsmithing issue, Bill, isn't it? So assess LGBTQ treatment in prisons, or couldn't you say something, maybe wordsmith it to assess the LGBTQ experience in the correctional system? And then it's wide open. You can do whatever you want with it. You still got your check mark, because you threw LGBTQ in there. You know what I mean? It's a done deal.
Yeah.
Scott,
Yeah.
I want to ask you though, what I heard from Bob just now, and I usually add things to what people say, so I'll stand corrected if you correct me, is either we can massage these and push them up, or we can wait for someone above us to write them and push them down. Is that accurate?
It's 100% accurate. And that's the
All right,
reason
I like
we were
the-
trying to get ahead of it. Heidi had her hand up, and then Heloisa had her hand up as well. So Heidi.
When someone was recently talking about, how would this be assessed? What we were doing in our department at Mass Bay was looking at the documents you all are looking at right now, which I need forwarded to me again because I can't locate them. So in any case, I do remember a lot of what they said. And at the same time, we were looking at a project where we were assessing how we met our graduation competencies, including our DEI graduation competencies. So we're doing both of those things at the same time because they were very similar tasks as far as assessment and analysis. So like other people were saying, it's sort of a good idea to get ahead of something that you think might be coming down the pike anyway. And I know this is an issue that can be greatly politicized, but when you look at the actual substantive overarching concepts and goals, like we've all been saying, a lot of the stuff is in our the content of our courses anyway. And it might be the wording that seems as though it's sort of agenda-ish, for lack of better terms. Because, for example, who teaches corrections that doesn't mention something about, contrasting and comparing the differences between the experiences of males who are incarcerated and females and gay people. So it's something we all cover anyway. And that's what we were doing as a department, was sort of disaggregating all of our outcomes and seeing how they met some of the stuff in the document you're looking at. And then just sort of wordsmithing our existing outcomes anyway, not reinventing the wheel. So, a lot of this stuff, I think that's the key thing, since we're already doing it anyway, and since it's something that could be coming down the pike, just having the goal of taking some of the main goals and overarching concept course by course, and perhaps wordsmithing things so that they're not worded in a way that could be perceived as politicized by faculty, or having some sort of agenda imparted onto them. I liked a lot of the suggestions Jason was making as far as some of the wordsmithing. So yeah, and I can put my email in the chat again, that would be great. But I remember a lot of what we did because it was a long meeting and we were going through step by step. So those are just my thoughts on how we've been handling it at Mass Bay. And by the way, when we have things go through governance, as far as new course descriptions, syllabi, whatever, people that aren't in that content area say this is your area of expertise. So yes, it's not up to us. So I'm surprised to hear about the way it's done at other institutions, but not surprised at the same time.
Hi, Louisa.
So Heidi and Jason have said very similar things to what I was gonna say. I do agree that we should have like a DEI focus within our learning outcomes, but we need to create it in a way that's more generic. So instead of having specified and listed gender, race, ethnicity, LGBT, we can just generally speak like we'll be discussing a diverse group of people, because it includes everybody, and we don't have to be stuck with wordsmithing every single group, or being afraid too that we're leaving a group out. Because if we start listing every single race, every single ethnicity, every single sexual orientation and identity, the list is just going to be very lengthy within the outcomes. So we need to come up with a way that we are inclusive of any diverse group, and then it shortens the outcome.
I agree with you, Heloise. You have a good point. That's why I asked about what engineering's doing or what government studies are doing. If we could see some of those, because some of these things, they're very specific.
And the list is just gonna go on and
I
on
know,
of all the
right.
different groups. So
and
we
that-
can just say a diverse group.
Yeah, if it could be a little bit more ambiguous, because I mean, those things right there, anybody that's a police officer or somebody who's working in the criminal justice system, they're going to be like, wait a second, what are you talking about? That if it's so biased, you're saying that I work in a biased system, and there's, that type of thing, or some of the others about what, whether they're talking about women judges or women police officers, now we're getting, and what's the research that shows on that I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying, let's look at things a little bit more ambiguous, rather than if somebody wants to put that in their class and they want to have a discussion on that, that's good. But these are things that they're going to be in the catalog. They're going to be, I mean, I use, for most of our criminal justice classes, I took all these learning outcomes, and I started to have the instructors, whether they're full-time or part-time, put them into their syllabus. So it's something good. But now all of a sudden, if we start doing this, then I'm looking for less controversy.
Well, and then Scott used the language that's being used within a lot of DEI training, which is marginalized groups, minoritized groups.
Yeah.
So we can have that statement as opposed to like listing every group. And then it is left open to the academic freedom of the faculty. They say, oh, okay, I can pick up a case where there's a woman judge. I can pick up a case where there's some disparity here. But then within the outcome, we just leave it very general to include all marginalized or minoritized groups. Sorry, Rena, I know you had your hand up.
That's okay. Maybe we ought to consider that we have a statement that covers everything instead of putting it in all the learning outcomes, because if it's only for 5 courses, somebody going to take a beating that it's not in my criminal investigation course, or it's not in my procedures course. We're only putting it in the 5, right, core courses. But what about the other courses? Are we just going to say, oh, we don't care about those courses? But if we had a blanket statement that said something to the effect, criminal justice programs emphasize blah, 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 for their learning outcomes, and then we don't have to get into all these little particular little things, and then every course is covered, because I can hear it from some people now. Well, why do you only have it in 5 of your courses? What, you don't think about it, or you don't do it in your other courses? I don't know. And I think Bill's got a good point. I have not heard of any other departments on my campus or programs doing this. And I'll ask them. We have a meeting in a couple of minutes. I'll just ask them, because they haven't done this. They haven't started to change all their learning outcomes. But if we had a blanket statement, and that's not hard to do, I don't think you have to go through any ad affairs or things like that. Criminal justice program, blah, 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 blah. And then it's in every course, not just these 5 core courses. But that's all I got.
And just as a follow-up too, we brought it for the course level, maybe at the programic, at the program level, if we do that, because sure, we could put, and then we could, that's why I want to see what these other departments are doing. Sure, they can do that, but I mean, we're giving them a lot of not necessarily ammunition, but we're giving them a lot of controversy for our students. And the reason that, sure, if I didn't have those issues with some of those instructors where we had, people, they come from either families or whatever, and then they start talking about those things, and then they don't want to take those classes, or they get into a conflict with the instructor over something like that. Well, why do we have to do that for our students? If we have something, and we have, if it's a module or something like that, rather than narrowing it down, let's just, if we could bring it up a little. And then if somebody wants it, Jason, I understood what you're saying, because I've done the verbs for measuring all these different types of outcomes for years. But somebody could put that in on their own, like what Rena was saying, if we could do that. And you can take some of these things, but let's look to see what the people are doing in business, how they're addressing it too. Because now that you're putting a lot of onus on us, and that's just what I was thinking.
I'm going to respond to you, Bill, but I want to give Jason his chance to say something.
So my question was, unfortunately, as you can tell by the snow on my chin here, I've been around also for a moment or two. And I recall pre-COVID, we were talking about ethics and bleeding ethical conversations into these, more towards the end, towards Ferguson, the Ferguson time marker in our discipline. I just Googled this document, and the word ethic comes up only twice, in Intro to Policing and Intro to Criminal Justice. And so I'm curious if ethics is still a focal point, or we sort of, do we need to include ethics in this conversation as well as DEI, or if we cover DEI, are we being ethical? Sorry, didn't mean to complicate the situation.
No, it's not complicating it. And it actually piggybacks on what I was going to reply to Bill for. And Rena as well. If we're already, my first point is, if we're already covering this stuff in class, then why is there such a leap to actually document it? That's one. Two, I understand your concern, Bill, with these topics, because I stated earlier that I see both sides to it, but it's like going back to 1970 and talking about inmate rights. Why should we even discuss it? And why do inmates even have rights? Why are inmates? It should be hell in there. We shouldn't even care what they're at. And it's now 2023, and we understand that there's an impact to rehabilitation and reducing recidivism. We understand that by sometimes discussing difficult topics, it creates an opportunity for exposure. And some of these students may not have, I work in a unique situation, kind of like Bunker Hill or Roxbury, that the majority of my students are Hispanic, being out of Lawrence. And in some of my North Andover, we can call them fortunate students that may not understand what racial profiling is. They have no idea of what it's like to be targeted based upon skin color and just driving down the road. So when we have these difficult conversations, they gain a perspective that they would not otherwise have been exposed to if not for that topic being approached in class in a constructive, more a respectful way. So I do understand both sides to it, but I also see the impact, the importance of discussing these critical topics in order to expose all students of things that maybe they don't get. I'm a huge proponent of students having a college degree before they become a police officer or a correctional officer. And it's not because the degree makes you a better officer. It's because it provides a tool belt. And just like your ASP, your firearm, your less than lethal technologies, it's another item on the belt that makes the officer more prepared for the position. And if we don't see that value of starting something that's very difficult and following it through to the point of walking and collecting that diploma, I don't see a point of why we even push an education. And because these are the topics. My goal, I know that about my students are going to retain about 15% of what I teach them. You ask anybody 10 years after they graduate, they're not retaining everything that we've taught them. But the one thing I hope that my students gain is exposure, gaining different perspective from different people in the class. We have such a powerful opportunity at the community college level because we've got white, brown, black, different opinions, different religions. Our classrooms are so diverse that it gives everybody an opportunity to gain these an understanding or empathy on these other topics, these difficult topics. So I understand the value. I've been in higher ed now for 20 years. I understand the value of describing the three major levels of a correctional facility, security levels. I understand that the importance of talking about technology in criminal justice. Why is there such a pushback on discussing the marginalized groups that we're seeing in the news on a regular basis?
Yeah,
I am not arguing.
what I'm saying is, wait,
different view.
Scott, what I'm saying, nobody's arguing that those issues need to be discussed. It's what are the answers? What's the standard that everybody's going to give? Like for this one here, this last one, criminal law, recommend how women and minority judges make a difference. Well, is that documented? Is that measured? Is that, what's that? I mean, we're really going to have to look at some of these, some of the language that's being used in that regards. That's all that I'm saying. I mean, sure, you want to do it, you want to get ahead of it, I'm okay, but let's look to see what these other people are doing so that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're causing problems that, if somebody has a test and then the students they don't want to put that whatever answer it is, well, what's the difference between male judges and female judges? Right there, that sounds like
couldn't it just be something like explore if there's a difference? It could be a topic of research to see, is there any difference in the data trends as far as sentencing, or something like that, because there's no avoiding. I mean, all the classes I teach are criminal justice and government courses. I have to teach controversial stuff every single day. It's part and parcel of my daily tasks. And, it can seem a little overwhelming, sort of handing to faculty members the task of discussing and having to handle controversial topics in the classroom. But there are basic tools such as, establishing a classroom constitution or rules and norms for discussing controversial topics that are things I think a lot of us have to do, all the time. So I don't think anybody's saying that we have to preach any certain political agenda, left, right, center, or specific. It's just the discussing of the topics. A lot of times you can even do it seminar discussion style where the students are the ones driving the discussion. You're just exploring the topics. My students learn a lot of times a lot more from each other than they do from me when it comes to alleged criminal profiling and, bias with getting pulled over and things like that. Because I have no personal experience with that, obviously. That's something that I turn over to the students for discussion. And like we're saying, it's embedded in all of our classrooms anyway. So just documenting how we do it. Because in the legal world, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. It never happened, right? So we're not going to get credit for all this work we're doing unless we document it somehow. So I know I see it at my college too, the whole concept of DEI. People are sick of hearing about it and cringe when hearing about it. But in this topic area, I mean, it's something we kind of have to deal with every day. It's coming down the pike anyway. So, I look at it as us finally being recognized for all the work we're already doing, the hard work we're all doing every day anyway. That's just my 2 cents.
I'm not ignoring, I'm just trying to let people in. I kind of agree with you, Heidi. Not kind of, I do agree with you. And I'm going to be honest. I am tired of the DEI push, but at the same time, in our industry, we do talk about very difficult topics. I have a week on rape. As somebody that's not a victim of rape or a survivor of rape, I actually have a rape crisis advocate that comes into class and talks about her previous experiences and what she does for victims. It's a very difficult topic. Nobody walks out with a smile on their face, but it's a topic that if you're a first responder, that you're going to have to deal with. If you're a police officer and you get a call for service and the victim is the victim of rape, then it's kind of good to speak to somebody that's kind of gone through it and how they advocate for these victims or survivors. But it's still a topic that we still discuss. That we don't stop it because it's uncomfortable.
And just another thing too, as far as perspective, how, I'll have police officers come in as guest speakers because I worked in the court system, both on the prosecution and defense side as a litigator. And, the context of how most your everyday police officer on patrol that puts his or her pants on one leg at a time doesn't have, complaints of excessive use of force or, a lot of these issues we see in the headlines, and looking at how somebody who does do the things the right way, which is the majority of the time, what are those best practices? How come this whole huge slew, the majority of people that are in policing, why are they not having these problems? What are the best practices that they're utilizing? I've had some police officers from Lawrence back from my Northern Essex adjunct days and when I lived there that are, great speakers on that topic too, because they've never had any issues, problems, or complaints. So what are some of the best practices for that, people that don't run into these problems? And it's still a DEI topic, but it's not villainizing police. It's not, pointing out the whole profession as problematic. And I think that's really important too.
Dave, I don't mean to pick on you, but you've made some significant changes to your program. And how are you addressing this topic?
Can everybody hear me? I just got a new microphone.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So we are allowed a wide degree of flexibility in developing outcomes. We have an assessment coach who has been hired, who was very helpful with the final wordsmithing and so on and so forth. We are now looking at, and I actually serve on the committee that's dealing with this, Meta Majors Pathways approach to streamlining the curriculum across the campus. So what we're working on in criminal justice is similar to what we were working on before. So we're working on, and again, we're not PCIPP, right? So we're not concerned about what the state is doing. We're concerned about transfer, but we're not concerned about what the state is doing. So we are developing Spanish for law enforcement. It was offered prior. We're bringing that back. We've rewritten our social issues course. We're going to offer some iteration of multiculturalism, but within the department, and I think that is more specific to your question, we're developing a social justice thread within the curriculum. And we're sort of hammering away at the fact that public safety can happen with a criminology of empathy. We're not describing it that way yet. So, but the way we get to that is targeted interventions, research, scholarship, evidence-based approaches to the courts, to corrections, and to law enforcement. And we have had no problems with that. What I get concerned about is when we start talking about, any of these putting people in buckets, who's marginalized, who's minoritized, well, everybody is at some point in time. And when we start to talk about, what are the agreements and rules for controversial discussions? I teach both political science and criminal justice, by the way. I haven't changed anything because 33 years ago when I started, we had controversial topics. We had institutional racism. We lacked gender equity. We were talking about social justice in different ways. So the guideline in my classroom is that everybody has a right to an opinion under the First Amendment. You don't have a right not to be offended. People do have a right to be treated with courtesy, respect, and dignity. That's what I require. But I'm very nervous about where the culture is going. Because as you just talked about, Scott, I am a huge proponent of entry-level degree requirements for corrections officers and police officers for the same reasons that you addressed. We had a monumental piece of legislation passed in 2020 called police reform. I'm trying to find out where the reform is. I've analyzed the bill, I've read the bill, I've done an analysis for the college, I've done an analysis for the sheriff's office where I'm still associated. Where's the reform? A lot of punitive stuff in there. Where's the reform on the front end? If we want critical thinking in policing, we're not getting it from the MPTC. So, that's my 2 cents. I'm very happy with our outcomes. I'm very happy with the direction we're going at GCC. And I'm very thankful to my administration for not insisting that we are, in the widget category of having to comply with all of these, sort of new age rules that somehow disregard the very reality that all of us are people who have been teaching for a long time around an other-centered value system that includes everybody. I didn't need DEI to tell me that. Maybe people do, but I don't. Sorry if that sounds a little strident.
No, but I mean, it kind of goes back to, I teach ethics at another institution.
And by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're putting ethics in. I'll have that to my CAP committee probably before fall.
That's great. And what I was about to say was that when we teach, if you've ever taught ethics, one of the first questions is, why are we teaching ethics? Either you have it or you don't. And that's not true.
Exactly.
It's kind of, I always compare ethics to CPR. It's a refresher. It kind of puts us back on that line. And the same thing goes for discussing some of these topics, is that while you might claim not to be racist in how, or your view of a certain group may not impact your job, it's important to just kind of discuss it, just kind of put you back on that line. Recertification, if that's who you are, that's fantastic. You're a great human, but let's talk about it as a group. And that's something that's where that's why I'm pushing this. I'm pushing that it's something that I understand the argument of why do we have to put that in there? We're already doing this, but at the same time, what about the people that aren't putting it in there? What about the faculty that aren't going to cover this, even though that they say they're going to cover it, but they don't? It's the idea of outcomes is to ensure that certain content is being covered in a course.
Yeah, I think, I could share our outcomes. I think we do a good job at GCC covering these issues and talking about them in our outcomes. I can't imagine teaching either political science or criminal justice and not talking about the issues that I raised around empathy, social justice, targeted interventions, evidence-based co-response, CIT, gender equity. But I think to Bill's point, if in a poli-sci situation, if somebody asked me about who gets to be a judge and what do they become and how do they react, my answer would be, well, if you follow the work of G. William Domhoff, you'll find that they escalate their status into a political elite that act like all the other political elites.
Right.
Thank you. I mean, nobody's telling the truth.
I will.
You're not a judge.
I show a film where
Exactly.
I show a film called Broken on All Sides, which is a wonderful documentary about the horrible way that the prison systems operate. And they interview a judge in Philadelphia who's a woman. She's African-American. She's very bright. And she doesn't think there's overcrowding. Okay. Where does she live? My students say, why does the judge not know that there's overcrowding in the prison system? I don't know. You'll have to call her and ask her. I think we spend a lot of time doing the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
Hey,
Henry, welcome. I didn't get to welcome you yet. Jimmy, thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if you're seeing me or not. I'm not seeing my camera here. Had to finish my investigations class first.
It's all right.
Hey, Scott.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering what's the next step that you want to do? And one of the things that I'd like to do is if who's that guy, Bob Awkward? If he
Yes.
could get us what some other departments are doing, if like the engineering or the business, if he could get some of the examples that they have, and just like Rena had said, there might be some things that are a little bit more ambiguous, because I mean we're going right down on that, and I don't know if in each class we have to add that, all 5 classes, or if we have to have it from a departmental standpoint. That's all that I'm saying. I mean, if we could look at that may answer some of the questions that I have, because I mean, this is going to be a lot of work over the next 6 months to year, and I just don't want us to do all this work and then them come in and say, well, wait a second, this is the model that we used, and we don't have to.
I'm sure you're going to get varying responses for that, Bill. I assume that not much is being done in Bio 101 with regards to this.
So they're not doing anything?
It'd be kind of difficult to talk about gender cells. And
They should.
I think that you might find this is probably a heated a focus in liberal arts, sociology. I don't think that you might find this in music or dance.
So
Um,
out of 100 departments, let's just say there's 100 majors that people can take. You think we're the only ones that are doing this?
no, no, I'm just saying that there's a select few that would be impacted by this type of discussion.
Well, that's all that I'm asking. Let's see what other departments are doing. I hate for us to, because we have a good group. We've been meeting for many years. Things are good. And I know that we worked really hard on this, where we put together a whole bunch of work. It took us over a year, and we presented it to the MPTC so that people could take our courses and not have to go through the full academy. We worked on it. We met. We did all these things. And then they stopped that program. I don't know if anybody else was still part of that. We worked on that for a long time, and we came up with good syllabi, outcomes, all that, and then nobody used it. Now we created a certificate in law enforcement, but there was no more. They stopped doing that.
Well, the part-time academy ended, the MPTC.
Right? Yes. Yes.
So when the MPTC basically, call it, took over the Mass Criminal Justice Training Council, that ended the part-time academy, and then the certificates became useless.
Right.
We still use the certificate at Northern Essex. We call it resume building. If you want to take it, it's one extra class and you get a whole certificate. It looks great on your resume. Other than that, it's pretty much useless.
Right.
It's another way of pulling students in and going, well, you get the certificate, stick around for another year and you'll have the associates. But I agree with you, Bill, that we did work. We worked hard on a lot of different projects, and things have changed. And we worked really hard on developing the concepts, that in the convening in the convention back in 2015 and 16. And then that work progressed. And the next progression was the work that Rena did, and establishing the outcomes before the pandemic. And then those were supposed to be distributed to all of the community colleges, 2 and 4 year institutions. And it seems like that some of us accepted them and some of us weren't aware of them and some of us just didn't care. So, so now we're at a point that the next step in the phase was, it was recommended to take that next step, and with any type of assessment, you reevaluate your outcomes, you determine whether or not they're robust enough, or possibly look at the change in times from 2015 and 2016 and say, what else do our programs need to update? And that's where we are right now.
So do you
Scott,
think? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Scott, this is Henry. Bill's point, to my former colleague and retired colleague, Pat Fayella, and you guys have probably heard this from him before, said that it was the instructors at those academies that didn't like that program because they were losing money having courses that they weren't teaching. And that's where the movement to drop those certificates. Massasoit still uses it. We do it as resume building also. And actually, since we modified our program, you get the certificate if you're taking our transfer program, whether you're eligible for the certificate, whether you specifically want it or not.
Scott, do you think we can get some of those from Bob Awkward? You think he could get us what? Yeah. Hey, why don't we try that before we meet again? And that way there we can review what other people are doing. Because Jason, just so you know, I support putting these things in here, but I want to make sure it's the right thing. And I had 2 faculty members where they had to take a break because it just got kind of intense. I mean, that's just, who our students are. They took it very, and I was kind of surprised because I'm the type of person, well, either you agree with it or don't, or, that there's some understanding, but I don't want it to cause a big problem in every single class if we can find a way to, still implement it and have it as a good measurement, just like you said, whatever language that we use, discuss this topic, describe, assess where it is, all the different verbs that you use on Bloom's, you know, and I'm good with that. So I didn't want to have you think I was against it, but I'm just like, let's look at it from we can stand back and look at it from that standpoint, since we're the first ones doing it, and let's see what some of the other folks are doing. That's all that I'm saying.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, we know you speak directly to the issues. That's good.
Right.
That's a fair request, Bill. And once we close this meeting out, what I'm gonna, obviously, we've been recording it. I'm gonna send it out to everyone, even those that weren't able to participate. And I will make sure Bob's on there, and I'll request that he hit reply all to your question. What are the other groups? What are the other programs doing so far? What has been done? Which could help us guide us there. What I would ask of everybody to do, if everybody's in agreement, if you could send me a list prioritizing, one being the most priority and your preference, and 5 being the least, which courses you would like to work on. And that way, once we get the work back, the information back from Bob, that way we can take those next steps without really having to have another Zoom meeting with the whole group. I can actually email each group and say, this is everybody that's working on 101. This is everybody that's working on policing. And then we can set up a timeline, and then kind of share it with the entire group and have everybody kind of review them on their own. And then we can come back with another meeting to say, okay, what edits do we have from the edits that we've already made? Fair?
Scott, I got a question here though, Henry, coming in late. Criminology. We have never taught criminology in the Criminal Justice Department of Massasoit. We left it where it belongs, in the sociology department. It's not a criminal justice course, a sociology course. So if there are changes to that, it is out of our purview. It's the sociology department that's got to deal with that. I don't know how many of the rest of you have that issue, but
You and I think, are the only 2 institutions. Oh, and Middlesex. So, you as well?
It's a required course on the curriculum sheets for anybody who's a Soc major or a CJ. So it's in both.
So I was under the belief that there were only 2 institutions that criminology fell under SOC and not CRJ.
Ours is SOC also,
Okay.
Yeah.
Middlesex.
Yeah,
So
and
here's my
frankly, I mean, I'd stand by the philosophy that that's where it belongs.
Well, here's my
Just like a
question.
math course belongs in the math department, so criminology does not belong in criminal justice. It belongs in the sociology department. We require them to take Soc first, and then criminology. And if they want to take the elective of victimology, which we accept, that's also taught in the criminology department, sociology department.
Interesting. So this brings back a topic that Paul's on this call with me, with us, and it brings back a topic that that we've been bouncing around. Now, I would argue, Henry, that criminology, criminal justice is the practical application of theory, and it's very difficult to teach criminology to criminal justice students without being able to apply how a theory impacts a police officer, probation, parole, and how we use theory, sometimes unknowingly, in the course of our duties. But my real question, that was more of a theoretical question. My real question is how is criminology, if it's not falling under a CJ, how is it part of our 5 foundational courses? Because you're going to dictate to us, the state, or the agreement from the convening and the convention back in 2015 and 2016, you're going to tell us that these are the concepts being taught, but at the same time, we have no power over the curriculum in those courses.
So at Middlesex, even though it's an SOC course, it's taught by CJ faculty.
Interesting. Okay. I can
Yeah.
see why that would work.
Yeah, and I've been considering cross-listing the course, so I have to go through that process, but I'm hoping to cross-list it in our catalog as an SOC/CRJ course. So we can have both designations.
And in Massasoit, the two principal full-time professors in the sociology department both have CJ degrees.
Oh.
Along the way, so and experience in criminal justice, but they are sociology professors. There are many other adjuncts of people teaching it, and occasionally some of our CJ people who have a sociology background are teaching that course too, but as adjuncts, not as full-timers in the under PCI,
Okay. Well, does anybody have anything else they want to touch upon? All right, so I will send out.
But the technical point I was making there, Scott, just to make sure everybody is clear on that, is that to get a change in the outcomes, we are now asking another department to look at that, another part of the division to look at that, and that's not something under our purview to get an outcome change. And I'm not sure, looking at this, I don't have it, the old ones up next to it to see what the differences are in the criminology outcomes.
I will, you're bringing up a great point, Henry. And what I will do is I will send that out, a question out to the group. Do we leave that foundational course off the list then? Because why do the work on it if it can't be applied? We have no power to reach into other departments. The only people that would be like Dave mentioned, he has it within CRJ. So that would be but if for those of us that criminology does not fall under the criminal justice department, then there's really no point in doing it. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, we teach it within the criminal justice department here. And I wonder how many, if that course is included in the 4-year schools, because this is for the transfer up, right? So even if some community colleges don't teach it, maybe they have it in the criminal justice departments up above, so to
Good
speak.
point. All right, so as we leave it, I will send out an email to the group with this recording. I will also ask you for your preferences, and I will ask Bob Awkward for some evidence as to the work that's being done in other programs. And then once Bob replies all to all of us, we can at least kind of see what's being done or what he's offering us. And then we will we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Well, as always, I thank you all for finding the time to meet. I know it's a pain in the butt, and I didn't want to wait until the first week of April because nobody would have shown. So with that being said, expect my email sometime today. And if anybody's got any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later, Scott.
See you, bud.